Hello, and welcome to the Aguilar Conversations, a global perspective. I'm Tony Aguilar. On today's podcast, artificial intelligence has been in existence for decades, but as it has become more advanced, is it still a benefit to society, or has it become a clear and present danger? Joining me from the United Kingdom is Dr. Davith Townley, teaching fellow for the University of Portsmouth University, and he is the author of The Year of Intelligence in the United States. Dr. Townley, thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome. It's lovely to be here. Thank you very much.
Let me ask you this as a first question. John McCarthy, who many consider to be one of the founding fathers of artificial intelligence, had said in his article, Ascribing Mental Qualities to Machines, and he said, machines as simple as thermostats can be said to have beliefs, and having beliefs seem to be a characteristic of most machines capable of problem solving performance. Now, some people did push back on that, but as you hear some of the concerns that are being raised across the globe today, was John McCarthy right?
Um, well, I suppose it depends on which perspective you look from. So, I suppose from a computer science stroke philosophy perspective, he is probably quite right in transferring what is essentially programming into almost a sentient knowledge, should we say, an existence or an self-awareness. But I would be hard pressed to say that it's little more than computer programming. But then, what is artificial intelligence other than really computer programming or a far more advanced computer program than we've experienced in the past? So I suspect, in some ways, yes, he's right, but I prefer to say no. I don't think my thermostat is going to try and take over the world. Let's put it that way.
But there is a lot of controversy today around artificial intelligence, particularly in the last couple of months. We have some of our congresspersons here in the United States talking about it, particularly Congressman Seth Moulton. There's an open AI letter that's gone out that calls for a 6 month moratorium on research in AI. A letter that came out that really talked about we should look at mitigating factors for AI because it can destroy humanity. I mean, there's a lot of perhaps chicken little verbiage going on, but how accurate are they in their concerns?
Um, well, I suppose they are accurate to one extent that artificial intelligence does have the potential to destroy humanity and destroy the world. But then, one might look at climate and suggest that humanity is doing a particularly good job of that on its own, to be quite honest. Um, but uh, I, I, I talk with a lot of cyber experts, shall we say, in my research, and there is a mixture between those who are genuinely concerned about the future of AI and those who are, not too nonplussed, are rather confident that AI can be used in a way that benefits humanity. I would put it that way. I'm also slightly dubious or questioning the timing of this or this concern. We have, as you said at the start of the conversation, you stated that AI has been around for decades, and it has. Um, and we've had three major milestones in the last 25, 26 years. Uh, uh, Deep Blue beating Gary Kasparov at chess, for example. AI winning Jeopardy against the host champions in 2011, I think it was, and then most recently AlphaGo beating Lee Sedol 4-1 at the Chinese game Go, which many consider to be really significant milestones. Maybe the introduction of ChatGPT 4, which I think, has been the real driver behind the conversations that are going on at the moment, is simply because AI is now becoming more accessible to those that maybe don't have an understanding or appreciation of what AI can do. and that is maybe a concern. And I think we've sort of we the restrictions that many congressmen in the US are looking to place is really, to use an English term, it's closing the barn door after the horse is bolted. It's out there already. It's how we use it that is important.
Now, but the European Union is taking some action against artificial intelligence, and the UK itself is probably third in the world behind the United States and China in terms of its innovations in AI. So, in general, what is the EU trying to do to harness this? And more specifically, what is the United Kingdom, in particular England, looking to do?
Well, actually, our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is in the US at the moment, actually talking to President Biden about amongst this issue, and it's one area in which Biden and Sunak really do differ in their attitude. So, um, and I don't think it comes from a difference of where they are within the political spectrum. Biden is quite concerned about artificial intelligence and what believes regulations should be brought in. Sunak is a little bit more. He's a bit more laissez-faire, shall we say? He's a bit more hands-off. He doesn't want that restriction. EU is really leading the way, I think, in terms of specific regulations aimed at restricting um, uh, the use of AI, not the development of it, but the use of it. And in that respect, I think um, that's quite unique around the globe. Although saying that, China is also introducing a lot of AI regulation, or is trying to introduce that AI regulation. But in that ways, in some ways it's trying to legitimize its use of using AI by the Chinese government. So I would say that there's a variety of different approaches to this, um, and I think the I, personally I think that there is already enough legislation to deal with AI out there. It's about how that legislation is applied. It's already having norms of how nations should interact against each other. It's about enforcing or penalizing those that don't use it. And I think that's where many of the different nations vary in their approaches to the restriction and on legislation.
Now, in your book, A Year of Intelligence in the United States, you raise several points. One is the constant tension between, let's say, national security and privacy. The other one is the idea of whether or not public opinion can influence these policies. And two, and three, whether or not the general population is actually informed enough to make that kind of an opinion. Where do those points fit with artificial intelligence?
Um, I honestly don't think that they are a major concern to the general public at the moment. It does it for many. They don't see AI as being a huge influence on their lives. But I keep asking people, how do we visualize AI? How do we see AI actually manifesting itself? And we tend to turn to science fiction when we think of how AI is going to manifest itself. So you might think of, for example,
Isaac
it
Asimov
might be,
and
yeah, HAL 9000 in 2001, or are we thinking of Arnold Schwarzenegger in the Terminator? Or I like to think of it as a um, possibly along the lines of Anna de Armas's character in Blade Runner 2049, Joy, the sort of the virtual assistant. That's how I'd like to see it, but that's not down to me. That's down to the developers. But I think the general public is not there as far as their knowledge of it. It I think that there's been some good education, especially amongst, for example, the Senate hearings or House hearings over the last few weeks that have started to raise awareness. But um, there is so much that is still speculation, and it is talked about in a very small community. And it's until, and I raised this in the book, and actually, I'm mirroring another academic's theory, a gentleman called Professor Locke Johnson, that until there is an almighty scandal, until there is a huge disaster of some sort, that there will not be the political capital to introduce huge changes to national security policy of any sort. And I think that will be the same with AI. Until something goes severely wrong, um, these AI laboratories, shall we say, are going to have the upper hand as far as Congress and in the United States and Parliament in the UK is concerned.
Now, in your book, I want to stay with your book for a minute. You are looking at the year 1975 when the Church Committee looked at the intelligence agencies. As institutions now use AI, where should the public be? Because, for example, I know in different parts of the United States, for example, New York City Police Department, Los Angeles Police Department, have been using technologies such as facial recognition. There's such thing as predictive algorithms that can begin to predict crime. That raises a lot of issues. The ACLU has raised a lot of these issues. So, how can you inform the public about what this can do? Because even though they may not be that concerned about it, it's there and it's a part of their life, whether they want to acknowledge it or not.
That's right, and we're getting into the realms of again, to use it more science fiction. We're getting into the realms of the Minority Report, where people can predict the future and make those arrests before that happened. And there was a huge outcry. I'm sure you're aware in this country recently when people were arrested at the coronation for planning to, or not even planning, but for simply assembling to protest at the coronation. So they hadn't actually committed a crime. I think it's important that we have this public debate. We have this public debate about these things, and the the big issue, especially around facial recognition, is about the bias within the information that is assembled. So, AI learns from the information that it gathers, and if that information has bias, then it is going to give a biased answer, and that's why we see when it comes to predictive policing that uh, uh, you know there tends to be a great deal of more police or more crime predicted um, to be committed within non-white areas, shall we say, in communities or non-white affluent areas, and that's because that bias, that information is biased towards that, and so the police tend to go towards those areas. So naturally, there are more arrests in those areas, which reaffirms the bias or confirms the bias. So I think that needs to be a huge discussion in public about this, and people need to be aware of the application of AI. Um, the technology itself, I don't have an issue with the technology. I tend to have an issue with how it might be applied and by who's applying it. There's, there's suggestions that we have the machine in the loop rather than the human in the loop. Well, I think that that's AI should be a tool that we use, not one that we leave to run without supervision of any sorts, and that's where the danger should be.
Do you think, for example, going back to some of the CEOs that have raised concerns, some of the skeptics of that suggest, well, let's think about this for a minute. You guys have the wherewithal to actually do a moratorium or to slow it down. So there is some skepticism about why they are raising the issue. And the second question is, does it raise the issue that perhaps AI is a lot further along than the general population actually is aware of? Or
Oh,
maybe even our legislators are actually aware of?
well, I certainly think it's further along than legislators are aware of. I mean, I'll put that out there straight away now. I mean, and that's only to be expected because unless they come from, legislators come from a particularly computer science background, what they are going to learn is only enough for them to make decisions about. They're not going to, they might do in their committee assignments become specialized in certain aspects of it, but the majority of them will be completely, it will be alien to them. Uh, I have a suspicion, and I do share with a lot of the critics that the timing of this is as much as anything else. Sorry, the letter that came out last week from the AI labs is as much to actually avoid congressional oversight and regulation. They've even said to themselves, said that you know um, uh, uh, you know Altman, for example, said that Sam Altman of OpenAI, which is the company that developed ChatGPT 4, said that the AI industry should be the one to regulate AI. And I mean, I'm a historian at heart and by training, and I can't think of an instance where self-regulation has worked, not to the benefit of society. So I have extreme suspicion about that. And I also have extreme suspicion that this comes on the back of a lot of congressional discussion about AI. This didn't come before the discussion. This came as a result of the discussion, and I think that that you know is it developed further along than the public is concerned. It's difficult to say. I'm not behind those closed doors, but you speak to most AI and computer scientists that are involved in AI, and the jump from the previous version of ChatGPT to ChatGPT 4 has surprised them at how much more it can do. Their biggest concern is what happens, what what is going to be capable with ChatGPT 5, and how soon does ChatGPT 5 come in, and at what point are we looking towards what is called artificial general intelligence, this self-aware computer entity that is essentially can exist without humanity, or enslaving humanity possibly. That's the concern, is how far along they are, or how far along that will be, and we're not sure of that yet.
If we go to, we mentioned before Isaac Asimov and his three laws for robotics, and robots should not harm humans, they should take orders from humans. But there was also the third one, which is self preservation. And if McCarthy is correct about the feelings and being aware, how much of a danger is that to humanity? I mean, that's a very broad question, but it is something that's being raised as a concern by some of these CEOs and by some congressional leaders.
Absolutely, and here we do get into the realms of Skynet and Terminator, and so I mean, there was we had the U.S. Air Force colonel last week. I think it was last week or the week before. I'm not quite sure. Who supposedly revealed that in a simulation, an AI drone had turned on and destroyed its handler because it assessed that its handler was a risk to its own existence. And this has been very much denied by the US Air Force after this was revealed publicly. But one suspects that maybe in simulations this has happened. Um, I, it's difficult, and again, we can even then take that step then even further towards the sort of 2001, HAL 9000, refusing to open pod bay doors and protect himself and so on. I think we're quite a way away from that at the moment, but I mean, I'm no spring chicken, but it will probably happen in my lifetime at some point, that we will get to that point. Again, it's about how we teach these learning models, and about how we teach these artificial intelligence to think. Can we install in them a set of values that is, and this is a word that I've come to really dislike over the last few months because I see it written everywhere, but how it comes to be aligned with human ideals. Can we align AI with human objectives? And I think that's really important. We've got the technology already, and to suggest that we take a moratorium, as the AI Labs recommended, no country is going to do that. Any country that it is in that is in competition with another technologically. The Americans didn't stop during the 1960s with with the race to the moon and say, well, hold on, let's give it 6 months. It was no, we've got to get there first, and it's going to be the same with AI. Any nation that decides to put a hold on it while its adversary, especially one that's as technologically advanced like China, is going to be investing heavily in it, is really handing the initiative to its international competitor, and it's signing its own. I almost said death warrant, but it's signing its own. Um, uh, 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 yeah, well, I suppose it is death warrant is the right phrase. It will essentially give over its position in the world to China.
I mean, this raises a whole lot of questions, and you, as an historian, you've studied this for a while now. So the question is, how concerned are you about where we are now with AI, but also its potential in your lifetime? And is there something that, from a moral perspective, we want to be able to do? I mean, there's a difference between being able to do something, but the question is, therefore, should you?
Yeah, I think we're a bit late on on that question, that last question. Should we build it? Should it come before? Can we build it? And or actually, should it come before we have built it? I think that's the important thing. I keep thinking that it's a long way off, but then I keep sort of reminding myself of the development of mobile phones between, say, 1995 and the current date, and the transformation in technology, the use of social media, and I think information is an increasingly powerful weapon in the social media age. Even more so in the past, I think the fact that it can change opinions so quickly, and my major concern is with the use of AI to spread false information, whether it's done deliberately through disinformation campaigns or whether it's done accidentally with misinformation campaigns. And we've seen, well, we could potentially see disinformation campaigns that are exceptionally complex, very influential, because they are able to be designed by artificial intelligence for very specific audiences. We've already seen a use of that in the 2016 election in the US, with and with the Brexit decision here in the UK, with targeted advertising and analysis of social media feeds and buzzwords, and that is all. We've already seen the potential of that, and at what point, for example, do these become super influential and not just influence a small amount of people, but the entire population? And there's been considerable concern within the academic field about the suggestion that students can use things like ChatGPT 4 to write their essays for them. But actually, I've sort of explored this, and there's a great deal of footnotes, for example, that don't exist on these essays that are produced. So, and it's again, it goes back to the information that it uses. It's if it sees information, it doesn't apply the contextual analysis for it. And so that's my major concern about it is around misinformation and disinformation. In terms of do I see killer robots on the battlefield? No, not at this moment in time. I work in a military institution. I don't see that as being an option. Do I see that as being a potential tool for the military? Yes, but not one that is not under the control of humans.
You just said you work with the military, the Royal Air Force. What do you teach in terms of this subject from an ethical perspective?
Um, well, Not a great deal, to be perfectly honest. And the reason for that is because there are other guidances around military action. So the laws of armed conflict, international laws that guide what decisions can be made. I think that we are quite unique in an age where we are starting to hold to account leaders, military leaders uh, that are responsible for um, immoral acts in conflict, etc. And so these officers that we teach at the Royal Air Force are guided as much by those as by AI. Whether we will have to, when IA becomes even more of a tool for the Royal Air Force, whether we need to address that directly, that will probably come. But I don't see that to be an immediate issue. I think there are other, as I said before, there are other parts of legislation and regulations that can influence how we use AI without the need for introducing even more regulation.
You had mentioned before that your prime minister is meeting with President Biden. What do you think is going to come out of that meeting in regards to this issue? They're on polar opposites in terms of what should be done, but do you think there'll be a middle ground here? What do you think will happen?
Um, well, I think so. I think there might be. I think Sunak might be willing to make some compromise with Biden. Biden, of course, has got um, a record of reaching across the political divide and making compromises. We've just seen that with the debt ceiling being increased in the US. But he's had a history throughout his senatorial career of working with Republicans, those who are ideologically opposite, to ensure that something gets done. And I think that there might be enough political pressure on Sunak to come away from this meeting with something that is beneficial to increase his chances of re-election, although that is looking unlikely, should we say, at the next election, which is not least until I think January 25, I think is the earliest that election could be called. Um, so I think that he may try and reach across the divide and then something might be done. But I think that it's likely to perhaps look back towards the EU and see what the EU is doing. And because the EU are far more advanced in their talks and discussions on this than anybody else. So maybe see what the EU is actually going to come out of this and where it goes. And then have something that is comparable to that.
In a few minutes we have left, you had said, when you're looking at the United States, China, United Kingdom, and there are going to be other nations that want to get into AI, it's going to be a free for all at some point. That's just the way things are going to align themselves geopolitically. If you had to project out, let's say 20 years from now, where are we with AI politically, but also in terms of who will have the most clout when it comes to this? Because it seems to me who has the most clout in this or the most power in this is going to have a lot of influence over world events.
I I think that we will. I mean, in terms of the big two, should we say? I don't. I think it will still be United States and China. I think that will still be the same. Whether it's the United States and then China, or China and the United States, that remains to be seen. I think China is has the because of the way its economy and government is set up, it has the potential to invest more heavily in terms of its GDP into AI. Um, whether there is some sort of international set of norms that are established at the UN in much the same way that we have tried to establish sort of cyber norms, how nations interact within cyberspace is possible. Um, but it's taken a great deal for the world to actually get towards those cyberspace norms. Um, maybe it will see the potential damage that AI can do to actually bring everybody to the table. Um, but if you are, for example, China, and there is a potential of you overtaking your ideological and economic and political rival, why would you? That's the thing. Why would you want to give up a potential advantage? Unless, of course, you have a leader who is willing to put global issues first ahead of national issues. And we don't have many of those around nowadays, unfortunately. We have fewer and fewer of those. So I don't see that we will be um, there may be regulations on how it can be used, but we use AI every day anyway. You go online, you use chatbots. That's AI. If we believe Mr. McCarthy or Professor McCarthy, we use them with our thermostat. So it's just how that AI is applied is I think that there may be regulations behind that. Maybe there would be a restriction on the military use of AI, but who's to know? And why would you want to give up that advantage for somebody else to develop it without you knowing? It's will we have an international artificial intelligence commission like we do with the atomic energy? Possibly, possibly.
We spent a lot of time talking about the potential negative aspects of AI, but there are positive benefits to it as well. What are some of the positive benefits of AI?
Oh, well, I think there's quite a few. I think really for me the big one that I'm hopeful of, and I think we actually started to see some of those developments is within health and medicine. So we saw recently, very recently actually, in the US and Canada, development of antibiotics to treat superbugs, which it wasn't that humans wouldn't have got there, but the ability of AI to cut down this waiting time or the development time and to analyze this information quicker to reduce the options is something that I am hopeful for in terms of potential um, potential action on cancer, for example, or dementia. These are really the last great health risks that we see as a society. I also think it's going to be it's probably going to be quite transformative in the workplace as well. We may well see, dare I say it, and this may bring up a cheer in some quarters, but we may see the reduction in the number of lawyers, for example, because AI can analyze, legal text a lot quicker. We may see benefits in terms of military decisions being made a lot quicker, not by AI, but by military officials with the support of that. And I think that there is, you know, there's a discussion amongst the intelligence community, which about how it will allow human intelligence officers to concentrate on the jobs that only humans can do, and AI can allow them to, AI can do that by focusing on the more mundane and long-winded tasks that take up a lot of time of intelligence officers. And so I think that might be something that will benefit as well. Um, where it goes within our normal life, I'm not quite sure. I couldn't have predicted how the World Wide Web would have changed our life when I first started using Windows back in 1993. That it was it. This is it's nowhere near what I imagined it to be.
So, for our listeners, balance it out for me. AI, on the whole, good, or on the whole, let's be careful?
Yes, is the answer. It can be good, but we need to be careful. I've become more optimistic as my life has continued. I think I'm more of an optimist. I'd like to think that the future is more Star Trek than Star Wars. That we have that we have technology that can remove want, hunger, and famine in the future, rather than one that is going to drive nations apart. And I'd like to think that that's where we're going to go. It's optimistic and it's utopian, but I think that there is that potential. It's down to those that develop it to invest the morality and values into their learning models.
Our guest today has been Dr. Davith Townley, teaching fellow at the Portsmouth University in the United Kingdom and author of the book A Year of Intelligence in the United States. And I want to thank him for joining us today. And thank you for listening. And join us again next week as we feature another topic of international interest here on the Aguilar Conversations, A Global Perspective.
The Aguilar Conversations, A Global Perspective, is produced by Casa Margo Communications Group.